Okay, we'll declare the meeting open and welcome everyone here today. Members of the public are advised that recommendations to council contained within this agenda can be subject to alterations. Applicants and other interested parties should refrain from taking any action until such time as written advice is received confirming council's decision with respect to any particular issue. Any statement or insinuation of approval regarding any planning or development application made during an ordinary council meeting is not to be taken as notice of approval from the Shire. The Shire advises that anyone who has an application lodged with the Shire must obtain and should only rely on written confirmation of the outcome of the application and any conditions attached to the decision made by council regarding the application. An audio and or visual record will be made of these proceedings to assist in the taking of minutes. Acknowledgement of country. The Shire of Harvey acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. And we pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal communities and their cultures and to elders both past and present. Item 2, record of apologies and leave of absence. We have an apology from Councillor Jackson. Item 3, applications for leave of absence. We have an application from Councillor Campbell.
Thanks, Mr. President. Yes, I'd just like to request a leave of absence from all council duties for the period 9th to the 16th of February inclusive. Thank you.
We have a mover. Move Councillor Burgoyne, second Councillor Cabaney. Put the motions. Anyone against the motion? Oh.
Sorry, I get that full.
Motion's carried. I'll let you two sort that one out later. Item 4, reading from Book of Learning and Wisdom. Councillor Cabaney.
Okay, you should be able to relate to this one today, Councillor Gillett. There was a farmer who grew excellent quality wheat, and every season he won the award for the best grown in the Shire. One year a reporter from the local newspaper interviewed the farmer and learned that each spring the man shared his seed with his neighbours so that they too could plant it in their fields. How can you afford to share the best wheat seed with your neighbours when they are entering their crops in the competition with yours, the reporter asked. Well, that's very simple, the farmer explained. The wind picks up pollen from the developing wheat and carries it from field to field. If my neighbours grow inferior wheat, cross-pollination will steadily degrade the quality of all the wheat, including mine. If I'm good to grow good wheat, I must help my neighbours grow good wheat. The reporter realised how the farmer's explanation also applied to people's lives in the most fundamental way. Those who want to live life meaningfully and well must help enrich the lives of others, for the value of a life is measured by the lives it touches. And those who choose to be happy must help others find happiness, for the welfare of each is bound up with the welfare of all.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Councillor Cabaney. Item 5, declarations of members and officers' personal interests. Councillor Burgoyne.
Mr. President, I've got a previously declared impartiality conflict on 12.3.1. Development application for use not listed. The reason for that is that my employer owns the property next door, and it's also where I'm employed. So there may be deemed on being swayed. I can't remember the term. Goodness me. Anyway, there's a perception that I may not be impartial, but I shall stay in chambers and vote on that accordingly.
Councillor Beach.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I need to do this or not, but it's to do with the seal register, and I've never heard it come up before. But item 17, the seal register, number 2, we are sealing the lease agreements for Harvey Main Street, trading as the Harvey Community Radio, and the surrender of the lease for the Harvey Rec and Cultural Centre. And I'm on the committee of both of those committees, so I've got an impartiality interest, but I know it's already been authorised by council, so I'll put it on the record anyway, and I'll vote on its merits.
Okay, no more. Okay, item 6, response to previous questions taken on notice. It's nil. Item 7, public question time. Mr White, would you like to?
Thanks, Mr Chairman. I actually wasn't going to speak here tonight, but had a look through the agenda and the amount that it will cost to rename the Shire sort of staggers me. 2 reasons I can think of for changing it would be amalgamation of shires or a real push from ratepayers to have it done. And I haven't seen any of those yet. I just wonder, could somebody tell me what are the benefits to the actual ratepayer who will be paying for this cost if it goes ahead? I understand there will be a consultation period afterwards, but I'd just like to know for my own benefit at this stage.
Councillor Adams, would you like to?
No, I should be addressing the question when it comes up.
Okay.
So we've got a thought bubble and something hasn't happened out of it. Thanks.
Okay, there are no more questions. Item 8, petitions, deputations and presentations. Yes. Neil? Item 9, announcements by a presiding member or CEO without discussion. Yes, Neil? Item 10, confirmation of minutes and confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting of 15th of December 2020. Do we have a mover? Councillor Bronwyn, second Councillor Dickinson. Any queries, any discussion? I'll put the motion. Is anyone against the motion? The motion is carried. Item 12.1, Chief Executive Officer. 12.1.1, Local Government Ordinary Election 2021. The recommendation is on page 8. Move Councillor Coleman. Seconder, Councillor Dickinson. Any questions? I'll put the motion. Is anyone against the motion? The motion is carried 12-0, absolute majority. Item 12.3, Sustainable Development. 12.3.1, Development Application, Use Not Listed, Caravan Storage and Repair. We have 2 recommendations. Officer recommendation 1 of 2. Move Councillor Caboni. Second Councillor Dickinson. I'll put the motion. Is anyone against the motion? Motion is carried 12-0, absolute majority. Officer recommendation 2 of 2. Move Councillor Adams. Second Councillor Lovett. Any discussions? Okay, put the motion. Is anyone against the motion? Councillor Bronwyn, did you have a...
Oh, I do?
Yes.
What are we on now? This is 12.1. This is the caravan park.
It is.
Oh,
Councillor Bronwyn, yes.
Yeah. With the
Officer recommendation 2.
yeah. With your officer recommendation 2, I was concerned in relation to the prevention of fire, and therefore I wanted to ascertain to ensure that there's enough fire prevention within the structure to should there be a fire in one of the caravans.
And the condition...
Well, that isn't the one with the condition, it's the next one.
Next one.
The storage.
Yeah, storage. This is the caravan, isn't it?
Yes.
Caravan storage.
This is caravan storage.
Oh, caravan storage?
Yes.
Yeah.
Caravan storage.
Okay, yeah, all right. Yeah, misunderstanding, no problem.
That's all right.
Okay, the copy of the storage agreement, this is what I want to put up as a recommendation, is agreement contract is to be provided to the Shire prior to occupancy. The agreement is to stipulate what is not permitted to be stored on the site, as well as any other requirements relevant to the storage facilities. Particular reference to dangerous and hazardous goods to the satisfaction of the Shire of Harvey emergency management officers, or Shire of Harvey.
Okay, is there a seconder to that amendment?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Councillor Adams.
And I guess the question is there any real likelihood that hazardous goods are going to be included in this storage? We're talking a caravan storage here.
Yeah, I realise that. I think there was a bit of a confusion between staff and myself. This was meant to come up on the next one, which was 12.3.2. Right. Well, I did. Look at the wrong one.
Right.
We haven't done the 12
I can withdraw that for that.
Yep, okay. Yep. So we're back. Yep. So we're all happy, all confused? Yes. So the motion as it sits. Moved in second by Councillor Adams and Councillor Lovett. So I'll put the motion. Is anyone against the motion? Motion is carried. 12.3.2. Extension to existing use not listed Treendale self-storage. Councillor Bronwyn.
Okay, I'll repeat myself.
Yeah.
I'd like to add to the officer's recommendations.
So sorry, Councillor Bronwyn, please. So we've got two recommendations. So Officer, you would come in on the second.
Yeah, I
Is
will.
that correct? Would you still like to move the first one?
I can move the first one.
We have a seconder. Councillor Campbell. Okay. I'll put the motion. Is anyone against the motion? Motion's carried 12-0, absolute majority.
Yeah, it's my turn.
Of the recommendation 2 of 2, would you like to move the recommendation, Councillor Bronwyn?
I'd like to make an amendment to the recommendation.
Move and second, and then we'll do the amendment.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll move.
Councillor Bronwyn, moving. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Coleman. Councillor Bronwyn, did you have an amendment?
I do have an amendment. Mr. President, through you, the amendment is that a copy of the storage agreement contract is to be provided to the Shire prior to the occupancy. The agreement is to be stipulate that what it is not permitted for to be stored on the site, as well as any other requirements relevant to the storage facilities, with particular reference to dangerous and or hazardous goods to the satisfaction of the Shire.
Is there a seconder to the amendment? Councillor Adams. Is there likely to be any discussion? Councillor Beach.
Just a question to Mr. Hall. Is this an advice note or is this a condition?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the recommendation is that it goes as an advice note because it is actually a copy of a third-party sort of agreement.
Third-party agreement, thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a question, if I may. And sorry, the storage agreement contract. Just confirming that is the agreement between the owner of the storage unit and the person that's going to provide that basically wants the storage. So just confirming that is the case. And the other question that I have, in view of the fact that this is an existing business that is has been running for a number of years. Yes, we've got yes, they are seeking an expansion, but what actually, apart from the size, what fundamentally changes with this expansion as to the current situation that we have? So I guess I'm asking, what value is this extra? Is this addition to the recommendation going to make?
Okay, through you, Chair. The reason I brought this up was because in both Perth and other locations, as these things proliferate, we found that people are storing dangerous goods and other things in this, and when emergency services arrive on the site, there are issues in relation to their occupational health and safety. So that's the main drive behind this. The actual facility itself has a contract through an association with a storage agreement that is both they sign up to and the person who hires the facility off them signs up to as well. What we're doing by doing this is ensuring that those things are covered, so that in the event, for instance, that someone wants to store something on there that may be dangerous, that everyone is aware that it's there, so that when emergency services arrive on the scene, we're not going to be surprised. There's been issues where people have stored such things as gas cockles, fuel, those types of things, which can also be environmentally dangerous to the general public as well. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Sorry, it does matter, just to clarify.
Yes, certainly.
Sorry, this. So in relation to the storage agreement contract, obviously it's between the two parties. So basically, is it then dependent upon the owner of the facility to provide the information to the Shire officers or local emergency services of what is stored, or is the expectation that from that agreement that it will be managed basically in-house?
From my understanding in conversations with staff, and I may be corrected, is that the agreement is between the facility and their organisation and the client, and that information, the contract that they sign in relation to the use of the storage, would then be provided to the Shire to ensure that those things that are of a dangerous nature aren't stored on site.
Thank you.
Councillor Beach.
Yeah, just a question, I'm not sure who'll answer it, Mr Hall maybe. But if hazardous goods are going to be stored in one or some of these units, other factories need to provide at the gate entrance the data sheets pertaining to those particular chemicals or whatever it happens to be. So if they want to store chlorine in there, for example, just as a point what I'm trying to make, those data sheets need to be stored somewhere, probably on the building or at the gate, I don't know. Is that a reasonable thing to think that would happen? Because I know we have to do that elsewhere.
Through Mr Chair, look, that's my understanding that, yeah, under the Department of Mines, through the dangerous goods registration, there is that requirement to do so if those types of material is being stored on site,
So
to have registers on site.
Through you, Mr Chair, so whose responsibility is it then to ensure that that is complied with? The owner?
It would be the owner of the facility. Yes.
Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Mr President. I've used storage facilities probably 20 years in Perth, and every time I've used one, I've had to sign that I wouldn't store goods, dangerous goods in there, including even my gas bottles for charity barbecues. I had to keep those in my house, sometimes 10 or 20 at a time, because I wasn't allowed to store them there. So that just changes where the risk is more than anything else. But my question is, does that breach Privacy Act? Because when I sign an agreement and give my credit card details, because it comes out every month on that contract, who gets those details in the Shire? I would understand that it would be a breach of my privacy if I signed a contract with someone and then it went to a third party.
Councillor Caboni.
Well, following on from Councillor Coleman, I'll speak against the motion as it stands, but I'm not against the intent of the motion. And as Councillor Coleman said, these contracts are confidential, in confidence, and I don't think any owner would like their confidential contracts, which may differ from unit to unit, may differ from unit to unit. I don't think they'd like that in the public domain. So I'm not against. I much prefer, and I can't foreshadow the motion because I haven't put the words together yet, but I'd much prefer to see a condition put in there that no dangerous or hazardous goods be stored in these storage sheds.
I gather that is probably the intent of Councillor Bromman's.
Absolutely, yeah. May I answer? I suppose my main intent is to ensure there's no dangerous goods stored there, And in the event that there is going to be dangerous goods stored in these facilities at any time, which may be the case, that there is some record of where they are and what they are, so that emergency services aren't put at danger. So that's the intent of the process.
Councillor Burgoyne.
Question, if I may?
Considering this is an extension to an existing use not listed, what happens at the moment to the bit that's already there? Is there an agreement already in place, or?
Through Mr. Chairman, this was not considered as, this is a condition of the current operation, so this is a new discussion. It's not relevant to the existing one. It's not applicable to the existing one. We don't have a condition of this nature.
So there's nothing of this on the existing ones?
No, there's not.
Councillor Cabani.
Yeah, I'm happy to change it to.
Well, if he's quite happy to change, I was just going to foreshadow a motion that we just add in another point that no dangerous or hazardous goods be stored on the premises without the prior approval of the Shire of Arden.
That's full out all. That's why it's not a condition.
Just to add, we would need a definition on a dangerous good, maybe in line with a particular act or piece of legislation. We're not the authority that would sort of define what those goods would be. So in some instances, tyres are dangerous. Sometimes it's gases. There's different classes of materials, I think, under the Act. I'm not an expert on the Act. It's not a piece of local government legislation. So we probably need a definition surrounding what dangerous goods would look like to the Shire before we put that sort of approval and advice note there.
Councillor Adams.
I think we're making a mountain out of a molehill here. I mean, it's obvious what the intent is. I would like a very minor adjustment to this tonight, so that agreement is just stipulated with what is not permitted to be stored and done with it.
So someone's wanting to make an amendment to the amendment.
Well, that's my amendment.
Well, we'll just put it on. Yeah, indeed.
So, Councillor Cabani.
Well, if Councillor Bromman agrees, I'll move to delay this for a month until the staff come back with an appropriate form of words to encompass the intent of Councillor Bromman's amendment.
Do you think we made the mountain out of a molehill?
So that'll remove the first sentence. Would that work, Mr. Hall? The condition?
Not permitted. Surely that covers it.
Councillor Coleman.
If we're going to delay it, can we just get a copy of the current contract that they provide? Because, again, most of them that I've signed stipulate that you cannot store dangerous goods in there. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't do it. It just means that you're not supposed to. So there's a big difference. You can't enforce something in self-storage. You can only suggest on the contract that you're not allowed to do it. So perhaps if we get a copy of the current contract, it'll be a lot easier for us to approve.
Mr. Chairman, the whole purpose of this was really to ensure that if there is anything stored on site, that the Shire is aware of it, and that was the whole purpose of it. Hence why it's an advice note and it's not a condition, because it's something that we actually can't be involved in. I do have concern about looking at deferring it. My suggestion is, given that we're not an approval authority with regard to definitions of dangerous goods, or we're not actually the Department of Mines that actually issue the approval as far as the storage of a dangerous good, that if anything is to occur, I would not like to seek deferral of it. I would suggest that this basically comes out of the recommendation and leave it as per the recommendation that was provided in the agenda, and that we discuss this matter with the operator as a separate item. causing a fair bit of confusion.
Up to you, John.
So we'll vote on the amendment.
Well, I guess the question I'd have for Mr Hall there is, given his suggestion that we vote on the officer's recommendation, how does he see that protecting emergency services in relation to what's stored there?
Through Mr Chairman, I don't have an answer to that one at this stage. Yeah, not sure.
Which is the aim.
Would you suggest to knock out what is or is not? Just that, just that is not.
Yeah, if you want to have just the last part, that'd be fine by me.
That's what I
Okay, well, Councillor Adams?
Well, we seem to get ourselves in and not here. Councillor Rowan indicates to me that he's happy to have the agreement is to stipulate what is not permitted. Is that correct? And that's the, I'd like to put that as an amendment. To get the thing over, so we're chewing this thing over, it's obvious what the intent is.
You still got to be right, though. Still got to be right.
So perhaps I should have spoke up earlier.
Sorry?
I said, excuse me, I suppose I should have spoke up earlier. As part of the building process, this storage unit, I believe, is going to be greater than 500 square metres. It's in addition to an existing structure that's ran about that figure. And as part of the building process, they are required to consult with DFES as far as their fire precautions in the whole development, and it forms part of the conditions of a building permit. So if there's any form of dangerous goods or whatever, if they're not stored in an appropriate bunker or whatever, then the documentation will be done as part of the building process to accommodate the facility. So your concerns are noted, but they're covered by the system.
No, cheers. That's okay. I'll withdraw it then.
Okay. Okay. So we're back to the original recommendation, 2 of 2. Move Councillor Campbell, second Councillor Adams.
You've already had it.
From the common. Right, so we're withdrawing the amendment.
So we just need to
Right.
vote on it.
We're ready for a vote? Okay. I'll put the motion. Is anyone against the motion? Motion's carried. 12.4, corporate services. 12.4.1, financial statements as at 30th of November 2020. The recommendation is on page 23. Councillor Dickinson moving. Councillor Lovett second. Are there any questions, any queries? I'll put the motion. Is anyone against the motion? Motion is carried. 12.4.2, listings of accounts paid November 2020. Recommendation is on page 25. Councillor Bromman moving. Seconder, Councillor Coleman. Put the motion. Is anyone against the motion? Motion is carried. Item 12.5, community and lifestyle. 12.5.1, community engagement policy. Officer recommendation is on page 27. Move Councillor Dickinson, second Councillor Lovett. With motion, is anyone against the motion? The motion is carried. Item 13, elected members' motions of which previous notice has been given. CEO has
Oh, yes, I do.
an explanation.
I just wanted to draw to Council's attention that the notice of motion that was printed in the agenda briefing session documentation was withdrawn by Councillor Adams and replaced and accepted as per the Shire of Harvey Standing Orders Local Law as printed in the Ordinary Council Agenda Item 13.1. So that involves the amended motion which Councillor Adams wished to discuss.
Okay, item 13.1, notice of motion. Councillor Adams. Moving?
Yeah.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Simpson, second. Councillor Adams.
Thank you.
This might take a moment, so I'll ask you to bear your indulgence. Now, I hope this helps Mr. White. It might be a good idea, perhaps, if I start by making it very clear that I don't want this motion to be interpreted in any way as attempting to usurp or take away the importance of maintaining the identity or place in the Shire of the town of Harvey going forward into the 21st century. And going forward into the 21st century is, however, really at the heart of the matter. I firmly believe, and I'm backed by feedback I have had from the community, that over the 120 years that have passed since Harvey, along with Brunswick, was identified as a roads board, the Shire has developed and evolved to produce a new, let's call it a new engine room, if you like, here in the general area of Leschenault. Now, I've purposely put forward Harvey Leschenault, or Leschenault, as a preferred title, because Leschenault more generally, I believe, covers this end of the Shire. I mean, I'm thinking Leschenault Estuary, Leschenault Leisure Centre, even the Leschenault Men's Shed, even the Leschenault Lady. Harvey Austerlitz, I believe, would be far too focused, I believe, for the purpose of this motion. Now, the original motion that I put forward early last year, which I withdrew under rather controversial circumstances due to the need at the time to address the more pressing priority of dealing with the dreaded COVID-19, was intended to counter what was, I believed, a bit of a developing them and us attitude between Austerlitz and Harvey. And really what brought it to a head for me, anyway, was the inability to attract any interest from the Austerlitz community for the Austerlitz Advisory or Austerlitz Place Committee that was trying to be put in place at the time. And this total disinterest came to light at that council meeting we had in the Brunswick Town Hall. Now, the original motion sought to attempt to address this lack of interest from the Austrian community, and as does this one, and have the title of the Shire altered to reflect the fact that this southern half of the Shire is very much part of the whole. Unfortunately, right at the moment, there are several factors in play that don't really help in this regard. Door knocking in Austerlitz in particular brought the response, "Don't bother knocking on my door, mate, we're Bunbury." And equally, knocking on doors in Harvey brought the response, "Don't bother knocking on my door, mate, we only vote for locals." I formed the opinion at this time that far too many people in this local area of the Shire associate far too strongly with Bunbury. And this isn't helped right now, when the only local newspaper we get is the Bunbury Herald, which shows no interest whatsoever in Brunswick, Austerlitz, Treendale, Kingston, Clifton Park. And I tend to ask myself, what would that intend to indicate? How much part of this Harvey Shire are we? We don't even get the Harvey paper. Add to that Parish Road is the dividing line between two state parliament electorates, and that's got to be a bit confusing on election day, I would suggest. Who do we belong to? Now, since putting out this motion, I've spoken to people in Bunnings and the Australian Shopping Centre and to several individuals. And feedback from that, admittedly a small exercise, ranged from a very definite no, it's always been Harvey, from a Brunswick ratepayer, not a very substantial reason for not to change, through a couple of, well, I don't really know, but if the question were really put by the Shire, I'd most likely vote yes. To a very obvious majority, and I've got proof of that, that thought it was a very good idea, mainly because this is where the development is. And now, as a side issue, there is a ground, there has apparently a groundswell of opinion building that is, if there should be a hub, this is where it should be. This is where the main shire offices should be, because this is where the action is. Now, so little information really seems to get out to the average man or woman in the street. Very few have any knowledge of where their ratepayer dollar is being spent, and can one wonder why? There is so little, can one wonder why there is so little interest when all the information they get concerns the goings on in Bunbury and Eton? Again, this motion seeks to be the driver to persuade their interest to become more focused on their own shire. Bringing two centres together in the title of a shire is far from revolutionary. Augusta Margaret River, Donnybrook, Barlingup and Kalgoorlie Boulder, for instance, although one of our councillors tells me that Kalgoorlie Boulder is a disaster. But so was the Titanic, and ocean liners and cruising didn't lose their popularity. Another councillor told me he reckoned the Shire of Wellington had a bit of a ring to it, but we soon gave that idea the boot. From the feedback I have received, limited I'll admit, I strongly believe that there is a will to bring about a more inclusive, and I make that point strongly, a more inclusive title change for our shire to reflect and recognise that the intervening years between 1902 and January 2021 have brought significant change to the dynamics of our shire. Change is all around us. Change is a constant in our lives. Because it's always been, there's no reason not to recognise and address change. We must recognise, acknowledge and move with the times. Now, our job as councillors, I am constantly reminded, is to act in a leading capacity for the community we represent. It is not to hold our own little pet theories about what is best for the community as we go forward. Right now, into a very uncertain world and into the 21st century. I urge you to consider very carefully this motion, and I urge you councillors, to have this proposal put to the community, fully explained, widely circulated and unbiased. And I certainly would not accept, and neither should you, that it will cost $500,000. The only substantive figures are the website and this design and style guide, whatever that is. The rest is pure guesswork. We don't have to chuck away all our cups and saucers and glasses. Stationery can be used over time and signs changed over time. As a matter of interest, we still have at least one old Jarrah Leaf logo on the Forest Highway, and I notice we've got it out here too. We haven't changed that yet. So we don't have to chuck everything away because of this. And I can't for the life of me work out why, as said in here, we've got to replace all the entry statements. I don't think they say anything about Harvey. They've got all sorts of other things on. We know the necessary dollars are there, we do know that. And the 21st century identity of the Shire and its communities are the overriding important issues here, not the dollars. I've been chatted over spending ratepayer money on this issue because I have always shown some regard for how the ratepayer dollars are spent. But to put this up for reasons for not being in favour of this really isn't cricket. The proposal to embrace the importance of the southern half of the Shire is the important part here in this brave new 21st century world we live in. So I again urge you councillors to agree to putting the proposal for a name change to the community and accept their majority opinion, as will I. Because that is the only way to gauge opinion and the way to embrace change, to embrace the future and recognise that this is the right way to go, to give our communities the opportunity to express their majority view of the way forward. And I emphasise their view.
With the seconder,
He would,
on
thank
to
you.
select.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councillors, in seconding Councillor Adams' motion, I am certainly not convinced that we necessarily need to change the name of the Shire. However, the reason that I supported the motion is because I considered it worthwhile that we actually have the discussion, so that it is something that can be discussed, we can get community input from, and then make a decision as to whether there is support within the community or there isn't. So that is why I have supported the motion. Just like to make a couple of comments. I grew up many years ago in the Shire of Upper Blackwood, which of course has evolved and is now the Shire of Burrbrook. So, in addition to the comments that Councillor Adams made in relation to the various shires that have generationally changed their names as circumstances changed. So I really think that it's important that we actually have a discussion to see if there is any merit in it. Councillor Adams is not necessarily advocating that, his motion isn't advocating that we necessarily change it. What he is saying is that we should have the discussion, and from that perspective I support it. The officer's recommendation certainly provides a pathway forward. It's obviously legislated in the Act as to how that is to be achieved and the process involved, and so it's obviously occurred in the past and no doubt will occur in the future. I would remind you councillors, and I think Councillor Adams actually addressed a number of the comments that I was going to make in relation to the costs. At this particular point in time, we're not moving down that track, and I really don't think that the issue of cost should at this stage be a driver. And I ask you to bear in mind that when we progressed a couple of years ago and developed new logos, style guides and what have you, there was no mention at that particular point in time of the cost. And as such, I think it is far too early for us to be actually talking about that particular issue at this stage. If we get feedback and the community, and there is community interest in proceeding, that is the time that we would then need to definitively look at those particular issues. And finally, the other point that I would like to make is, having been on council for a number of years, I was on council during the proposals of previous governments for amalgamations, and there was a very real prospect that the southern part of the Shire of Harvey would actually be amalgamated into Greater Bunbury, along with parts of the Shire of Dardanup and the Shire of Capel. Now that didn't eventuate, but it just highlights the fact that just because we are a whole shire at the moment, circumstances in the future may change. and we may no longer be so. I think it's really important that as part of this discussion, we'll actually be talking about greater involvement and inclusivity in relation to the southern part of the Shire. And I think we certainly have some fundamental issues of the difference between the northern half of the Shire and the southern half of the Shire. And I think anything that is going to improve the cohesiveness of the different components of the Shire is something that should really be considered. So whilst I haven't made a specific determination in relation to name changes, I believe that it is certainly worthwhile that you seriously consider supporting this motion to at least get the discussion underway. Thank you.
Is there a speaker against? Not a speaker for? Speaker against? Councillor Beach.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I'm really not sure of the motivation behind this motion, but what I am sure of, if it gets up, it will be divisive. It, as far as I can see, has no economic benefit whatsoever to the Shire, nor its ratepayers. And in all the years I've been involved with this Shire, this is the first time, apart from the previous occasion earlier in the year, that the matter has ever been raised. And I've got a number of questions, and I'm not sure if they've been answered or could be answered, but why is the name Leschenault preferred? Were other town site names considered, or names associated with the entire area, like Wellington or Forest, and that has been mentioned? What happened to the recognition of the towns of Brunswick? That town played in the development of the Shire in the very early days. Or Coconut, a town that was gazetted before the town of Harvey. Australind is the all-encompassing name for the southern parts of the Shire, including such areas as Leschenault, Treenale, Kingston, Clifton Park, amongst many others. So if anything, Australind probably would be a better name if recognition is what's driving the debate. I personally would have much preferred this item to be brought up at the Concept Forum, where we could have had a robust debate, as alluded to by Councillor Simpson, rather than in this forum where we are constrained by the strict rules of debate. I'm only going to be able to have one say. When I sit down, that's the end of it, regardless of what I think about afterwards. I cannot support the motion. There appears to be no science behind the renaming and the selection of the name, and not to mention the estimated $500,000 to achieve exactly what. Thank you.
Any other speaker for the motion? Speaker against? Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I can't support this motion, although my understanding of the intent of Councillor Adams' motion is to be more inclusive and cohesive. Changing the name will not change the newspapers. It won't change the amount of information that's coming through from Bunbury, and it won't change the cohesiveness or the inclusiveness of any of our community members. As the chair of the Disability and Access Inclusion Committee, I would much rather us spend any sort of money of this nature on improving the communication of the papers and the information circulating between our whole Shire. Again, that's not the issue for debate. However, I don't believe that changing the name is actually going to resolve any of the issues mentioned by Councillor Adams. The inclusiveness needs to be from everywhere in the Shire, and the mandate for us to become the most inclusive Shire in the state of Western Australia is far greater than the changing of a name, and will do far more for our community members and our business members and our tourism sector than it will by changing a name. The name will cost us money and give us little benefit as ratepayers. Every single one of us will be paying for a change of name, and I see no benefit to me or my constituents in Australind or Lejeune, and they're places that I visit often. So I don't see a significant us and them attitude that has been brought up. Again, I don't believe the issue is the name. The cost is definitely an issue. We've previously discussed the price of vehicles, and we debate about $10,000. So if cost is not an issue, why are we debating about small-time vehicles, let alone significant money with no benefit? We are using ratepayers' money, and again, I would like to see at this time our money put towards jobs, better communication tools, and certainly the most inclusive community in the state of Western Australia that will attract jobs, tourism, and better communication for all of us. So whilst I believe that the intent of Councillor Adams' motion is to increase that communication and inclusivity, I think it falls short by simple change of name.
Is there another speaker for against? Councillor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I question the choice of names as well, and I don't believe that we have the capacity to choose a name if we're going to change the name of the Shire. I think that that has to be something that we have a lot more input from the community. We are representatives of the community. We've been elected from the community to do a job. So we make decisions in relation to the community. I would much rather see staff resources which they're going to have to put towards all the changes that a name would bring about. I would much rather see those resources put towards better outcomes for the whole community, whether it's the north, the south, east or west parts of the Shire, regardless of the localities of where people live. Cost is a definite factor, and that is something that ratepayers are definitely going to ask questions about. But I think that, yes, it's good to have the discussion. I've lived in 4 different localities in the Shire. None of them are represented by a name change that's been proposed. But I'm still extremely proud to be part of the Shire of Harvey. And I think that we cannot make decisions regarding this without a lot more input from the community. So therefore, I'm against the motion.
There's another speaker for the motion. Speaker against? Councillor Bromham.
Mr. President, through you, I speak against the motion, although I do understand that the intent of the motion is to seek public opinion, which I am quite in favour of. I just believe there's probably a better avenue to actually achieve this. Having said that, I'd like to, I've lived in the Augusta Margaret River Shire, and when living there I lived in Augusta, and that had the dual name, but it didn't have the effect that's being sought, because I know the people in Augusta really didn't like the people in Margaret River, and the people in Margaret River really didn't like the people in Augusta. And they both continued. And we have a similar fight in the Shire, and I suppose we need to recognise that there is a difference between us. But at the same time, we've also got to understand that it's how we come together that's so important. And for me, I don't think this is going to give us the vehicle we need to get there. However, I do believe that maybe at a concept forum, we could look at how do we engage with the community in moving forward, and what is their thoughts in relation to where this Shire is going in the future. And it was interesting the other day because I was reading through a letter that was in the general electors meeting from last year, where a person from Harvey had been to the UK, and described how great the facilities in Harvey were in relation to those in similar towns in the United Kingdom. We've seen look, when I read that, I went, well, how did they afford that, given the same size? And it's obvious, from my perspective, living down this end of the Shire, that obviously some of the things in Harvey are bankrolled by the number of people that live in the Shire. So I think this type of conversation is the type of thing we need to have, but it's got to be done in a way where we have a positive outcome for all the areas of the Shire. Thank you. And that's my speaking.
Another speaker for or against? Councillor Lovett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Councillor Adams alluded, I have lived in the city of Kalgoorlie-Boulder, which began its life in 1989 as a combination of the town of Kalgoorlie and the Shire of Boulder. And 32 years later, there is still quite a chasm there between those two. That was an amalgamation of two shires, but it was two towns that sit closer than any of our towns sit here. There was literally, you walk across the road and you changed shires there. So the localities were very close together, but the effect was different. I realise that the intent of this is to ask the community what they think. The biggest question that's going to come back to us is why? Why do we want to do it? Why do we want the change? Why are we doing it? And then the next question will be, how much is it going to cost? And I see in the officer's report it says would be well in excess of 500,000, and I think that's conservative because there's then a potential cost to ratepayers as well. I'm sure there's people in the room that have got number plates with an H registration. So there's liaison that has to take place with state government. New number plate release. In Kalgoorlie we had BD plates and KMC, they went to KBD. There's those things. The identity of the Shire is a concern and it does need to be worked on. But that's where I checked just today. The Instagram account now has 1,375 people following it. They're the vehicles that we can use to unite and combine and bring all the various parts of the Shire together under the Shire of Harvey name, if that's what's retained. The development in the Leschenault area, Leschenault is, to my mind, attaches to the estuary. Eaton and City of Bunbury also link onto that as well. It's not ours to use the name. And I think that if we were to go to the community, it would need to be some very open questions regarding the name. I just don't feel comfortable to go to the community and ask that we get them to agree to one name. So I'm voting against it.
Councillor Durgan or Councillor Caboni? Any? You're both happy? Councillor Campbell? All good? Councillor Adams, would you like your right of reply, sir?
Yeah, well, I've been listening to this and I think, yes, quite frankly, I think it's crap.
Councillor Adams, please refrain.
Right, I can't possibly agree, obviously. So, what are we going to call it? Are we going to call it the Harvey Brunswick Leschenault beating up, you know, Harvey Brunswick is a bit like the football team. So, I thought I'd made it fairly clear that why I saw this as necessary, and it is to bring together. There's been, you know, some general agreement, I think, that there is a difference. This will help to, I hope, or I thought, would help to bring it together. But obviously, the vote's going to go against me, which doesn't really surprise me because I think there's a lot of the, this is my own personal little pet theory, comes into this, and I really don't see what happened in Kalgoorlie. Boulder's got anything to do with it. We're talking about this electorate here. This is a different, this Shire here is entirely different. An entirely different kettle of fish. But okay, I accept that the majority are going to vote against the idea, and I accept that. I don't have any choice. But I think overall, and over time, I'll be proven right. Thank you.
So I'll put the motion. Is anyone against the motion? Motion's lost 210.
Yeah, I thought it might be. That's all right. Narrow-minded, mate.
Item 14, notice of motion for the following meeting. Nil. Item 15, question by members of which due notice has been given. It's nil. Item 16, reports of members. All in the big tin can. Has anyone got any they would like to discuss? No? Item 17, seal register. The officer recommendations on page 29. Councillor Cathoni moving. Councillor Burgoyne second. Is there any discussion? I'll put the motions. Anyone against the motion? The motion is carried. Item 18, new business of an urgent nature introduced by decision of meeting. Nil. Item 19, matters behind closed doors. Nil. Item 20, closure of the meeting